132 different reports that I've got of the structure being seen on that mountain. No place else. If it's there, then people in the world ought to know about it.
Do I believe there's something there? Yes. What it is, don't know.
If you do see this boat sticking out of the ancient ice, it could change everything.
We saw some interesting anomalies. An anomaly is something that's not normal to the ice formation.
It has to be a cause bigger and greater than yourself to motivate you to do that.
We're going to climb that mountain.
This would be the biggest discovery in the history of the world. That mountain is a lurking beast that will just consume you if you make one small mistake.
Why is it that men will sail the seven seas, climb the highest mountains, look into the vast expanse of the universe and try to unravel those mysteries, and yet, in the end, they're strangers to their own heart? For me, this journey has not really been about the ark. It's been about really finding something more important in life and more lasting. What I've tried to do in the last year is actually take more of an inward journey and ask myself, what is it that we're really searching for? There's men that have come up here, their marriages are broken, they have broken relationships, broken families. They're good men, in many cases godly men, but life in some cases has been hard. I really bonded with these men. I think they have hearts of gold. I've traveled the world, been to 60 countries, 6 continents. I've climbed 5 of the 7 summits. I've skied to the North Pole. I've journeyed to the ends of the earth. But I did not have the courage until the past year to make an 18-inch journey from your head to your heart.
So we hope for good weather.
I feel like I'm a better person, better father, better man because of the Ark expedition. We're looking for some type of redemption, some type of transcendent moment where we step out of the grind of life and we find something mystical, magical, something spiritual that just elevates our souls. I sought the Ark, but instead I found the face of God. Good morning. Feels good to get a night's sleep. Coming off the men's retreat last night, we were all just kind of coming in hot landing, so to speak. So thank you, Pastor Justin, for this opportunity. Fantastic group of men in this church. We had a great men's retreat. Felt like I was kind of around, felt kind of Camelot-ish, if I can make up a new word. It just felt like King Arthur was holding court, and I was this wandering pilgrim that wandered in, and I got to speak at the Knights of the Round Table. So just some really noble men in this church. That's always exciting for me to see. Men who realize that manhood is defined by Christ-likeness, and that seems to be a bit of a rarity in today's culture. But as far as I know, the best way you can become a man is to become like Christ. So really encouraged by that. Fantastic weekend, and we got to kind of unpack some of this story in a longer format. There's a lot to tell with this. I am really happy that this movie finally came out in 2013. I was part of the expedition as one of the lead mountaineers from 2009 to 2013, and then a film crew came in 2013 and wanted to tell our story with the hopes of actually some type of imminent discovery. And as the filming progressed and the editing process, they began to realize that it was actually less about the boat and more about the brotherhood, about why these guys were on a search. And so in many ways, when you watch the film, I'd encourage you to purchase it at the back table. You can also get it online at our website at Grace Explorations, but it's a great thematic journey that is every man and woman and child's journey, because we're all on a quest to find something. And the ark for all of us is interchangeable. That's a changeable element, but we're all on a quest. Again, piggybacking on the whole King Arthur thing, we're all in this holy grail thing, and we're trying to find whether it's the perfect relationship or the perfect job or reaching our sales quota or just getting healthy or having a wonderful family or a stable income. We're all looking for something, and Noah was as well. So love to have you be part of the community of Grace Explorations, even though I'm in Michigan, and I love the New England Patriots because Tom Brady is, never forget, a Michigan man. He's a Wolverine. So underneath his Patriot jersey is all blue and maize. So I always vote for New England because of that. Sorry, I just had to say that. I'm actually complimenting you, but it's complimenting myself at the same time. It's a little narcissistic, but anyway, that's the way things work. So anyway, we do all kinds of crazy stuff with Grace Explorations. Some of it's geographically centered, and some of it is all over the world. We just took a group of guys, 12 guys actually, to Israel, and we just came back a week and a half ago. And it was unbelievable because during the day we would see the sights, and we'd give men, 2 or 3 hours to pray on Mount Arbel and imagine what it must have been like to be praying through the night like Christ did. Or we would pray in the Garden of Gethsemane. There's a private garden adjacent to the more touristy one that you can actually reserve. And so we gave the guys an hour or two in there to just lament, to cry out to God, to sweat, blood, if you will, metaphorically, and just to lay their burdens at, the cross, if you will. So really, really powerful stuff. And then at night, we try to reimagine what it must have been like. I don't know, maybe Jesus gave the disciples memory verses, or maybe I don't know what he did. But I got to believe that part of what they did was talk about the day in review and also delve into each other's stories. And so we gave every man 30 minutes. It's a crime to me that most men, and people for that matter, never have a specific time to tell their story, which is a tragedy because we learn from stories and we find truth in stories. In fact, I'm such a story guy that I believe wholeheartedly that the closest distance between the truth and the human heart is a story, which is probably why Jesus told a lot of stories. So men tell their story, and then rather than us picking it apart and trying to fix the guy or telling him everything he did wrong, he already knows that, we pick out the good stuff, which is actually harder to believe than the bad stuff, right? Isn't that funny how that works? When someone tells you, hey, I see the image of Christ, and you're like, well, what are you talking about? I don't see that. Well, yeah, you're too involved in your own story. Somebody needs to come from the outside. And so we find that we heal men with honor, which is part of what happened this weekend. We healed men with honor, and we spoke to the image of Christ in them, and we spoke to them who they were to become, because that's how Christ handled people. He didn't just tell them who they thought they were. He actually told them who they were to become, whether it was the woman at the well or the prostitute or the mobster gangster or the insecure fisherman or uneducated fisherman, whoever it was. He was always calling them to who they were to become, and in hearing that, they became that, which is a really wonderful thing. So anyway, you're welcome to come on Journeys next year. We're going to take a women's retreat there, a men's retreat, and a couples retreat throughout June, September, and October. And we just find that it's just a really special time. So if you've ever thought about going to Israel, we'd love to take you. And I wanted to say, first and foremost, it is a retreat that happens to happen in Israel. We'll see all the stuff, but the stuff doesn't heal you. Just going to a place, the land has a language of its own, but it's hearing the Father, and that's essentially can happen anywhere. It happened this weekend. Maybe Jesus has been to New England. Maybe he was a New Englander. Maybe him and his disciples ate clam chowder. I don't know. So, okay, so I'm really happy this story came out because one of the things, it actually helped my children. So I have a 11 and 13-year-old now. When the film came out, they were 8 and 10. And the teachers would always, rally me together at the beginning of every school year and say, you got really bright kids. They're already, we have them mentoring other kids as they're really, really smart. And they want to help. They're just great students. I mean, every teacher's dream, but we got to talk to you about the fact that we think they're lying. Because they tell us that you go to the North Pole looking for Santa, and they tell us that you climb really high mountains, and you are looking for Noah's Ark, and we don't know, what are you looking for, the Champlain monster, and then Sasquatch, Bigfoot, leprechauns? I mean, the Easter Bunny? I mean, what do you do? And so when the film came out, I finally had credible evidence that, yes, I am indeed crazy, but at least they're not lying. So that was a good thing. Anyway, title of my message, Finding Noah, Finding Grace, Finding Home. The title of the movie actually has kind of an ambiguous title because it's like, are you looking for a corpse? I mean, what are you looking for? And I didn't come up with a title. It was the filmmakers. And so my summation of that, I don't know if this is theirs, but it's my summation or conclusion is that when you find Noah, you find yourself, because we're all on a quest to find what Noah found and which actually saved him before he built the ark. Genesis chapter 6, verse 8 says that Noah found favor in the eyes of God, and as a result of that, he and his family were saved. Other translations would read grace, so I think those are two interchangeable words. Grace is this thing that is so beyond explanation, it can only live as an expression in many ways. And the way I express grace is to tell people that grace to me is a lover that is only attracted to your imperfections. How many of you would like to be married to somebody like that? That would be wonderful. That would be incredible to have that. But it's this part of God that is actually drawn to the broken parts of you, to the imperfect parts of you, to the parts of you that you hide, that you mask, that you put in a corner, and you just think that you can do this thing under lock and key, and you don't realize that Christ can walk through any door, and he's actually the key of David. He's the golden key. He's the master key. So he has the ability to get you out of any room that you need to get out of. Let's say it's an addiction or unforgiveness or bitterness or whatever it is. And he also has the ability to unlock those rooms that you don't dare go into unless he goes in with you into that room. The day, when the dragon came, or the title of, sometimes I title this message, The Day the Devil Came to Church. Those days where you just soon forget. And keep that memory as far as you can and do what I did for, 15 some odd years and climb every mountain that you can think of, almost like a Sound of Music thing, cross every stream and go to the ends of the earth, literally, going all the way to the North Pole, in hopes, not even realizing this is all metaphysical, it's something that happens in the subterranean environment of your soul, which we're often strangers to. I was actually trying to put space and distance between my present reality and my past pain. And the problem was, the further I went, the higher I went, the more frustrated I got because I couldn't put enough space between me and my past. Everywhere I went, there was a blood trail that I was leaving behind, and it was like the hounds of heaven and the hordes of hell were all, just barking behind me, and I could always feel the hoof prints of doom just about ready to overtake me. I just couldn't outrun my past. I tried. Gosh, I gave it a good effort. And it wasn't until 2013 that the past finally caught up. And I slowed down enough, and the story became a much different story than what actually the movie is about. So Finding Noah to me is finding yourself, because we're all in search of this mystery that allows us to transcend the problems of life and to find this level of sanity while the world is just drowning in madness. I have a distinct sense that it feels like the center is collapsing. It's poetic, the falcon is circling, and it just feels like there's this almost this celestial polar vortex that it's just like everything's just kind of winding. I wonder why that's maybe why I'll be spending a lot of time in Israel in the next couple of years. It just feels like time is kind of winding itself down. Interestingly, the Armenians have a tradition. They're the oldest Christian nation in the world, and some of the stuff that we actually filmed in that trailer was in Armenia. They've said since their founding as a Christian nation in the 3rd century, so it's now been 1,700 years, that the finding of the ark will be the last sign before the end of time, which I find fascinating. I can't find it in the Bible, but it's fascinating to me that these people have been saying that for so long, and they fully embrace the idea that Noah's Ark is on top of Ararat. In fact, it's a part of who they are. It's in their coat of arms, their emblem, their flag. It's just enmeshed. It's like the guy says in the movie, you can't separate Ararat from Armenia. They're intertwined. They're married together. So we all know it. Let's deal with this second topic, and then I want to go a different direction than what I even went last night. This whole idea of finding grace. So how do you find grace? Well, I think grace actually finds you. And for me, I was found by grace when I think grace is like water. Here's another expression of grace. I think grace is like water. It descends to our deepest depravity, and as we fall into this depravity or into this land of despair, we find that God is already there. In fact, you can climb the highest mountain, he's already there. You can descend to the ultimate depths, he's already there. You can go to the length and breadth of the earth, and he's already there. So everywhere you go, God already is. And I find at the bottom, I found grace. I found something that I had never deserved. I found the ability to even entertain the thought of forgiving myself and my past and what other people had done. I found that there was a part of God that is incredibly attracted to vulnerability, openness, an unmasked, naked, and true life. It's like it's a magnet for grace. When you become vulnerable, like Christ was on the cross, naked, hanging on a cross for all the world to jeer and to throw insults at, it ushered in this whole new era of grace because vulnerability was at its peak. And I mentioned last night and on the retreat as well that God has everything except one thing, and that one thing is what we have that he needs to do what he needs to do to complete his work, and it's this thing called human weakness. And there's something about our being weak and vulnerable and humble, not humiliated, but humble. There's a fine line there, but being truly humble that attracts all the power of God into your life. I don't know how that works. It's a paradox, and the enemy doesn't get it, and our pride doesn't get it, and our ego doesn't get it because we always want to put on our Sunday best before we come to God, right? We want to show him the happy, shiny people face, you know, the whole REM thing, and we just want to do this little religious dance, and God's just saying, I just want you to be real. I want you to be back in the garden again with me. I want you to be naked in the sense that you are true and you're not hiding anymore and you're not creating another God in your own shameful image that you're always hiding from, but you and I can come back to the garden again. It was one of the themes that developed over the men's retreat is that Eden is an echo of eternity. So when you talk about eternity, when you talk about that place where you got along great with your spouse, I mean, just imagine that you wake up every day and you totally understand each other. I mean, wouldn't it be something? You know, there's no need for marriage counseling. You don't fight over who's doing what or how the toilet paper gets unrolled or how you squeeze the toothpaste tube or all these silly little things. I mean, it's all just figured out. You don't have to worry about these things. The kids are great. Everybody's happy. You know, it's this eternal Mayberry. I mean, it's just this beautiful little village that everybody lives in. They all know each other's name, and they all go to the same restaurant. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing. And then you go to work, and you love what you do because you get to name animals, and you get to take care of the garden, and it's a beautiful thing. The weeds are kind of take caring themselves, and it's all self-irrigated, and there's this big greenhouse effect. And then you wake up every day, and you're like, hello, God, and he says hello back to you, and there's no shame element where you can't hear him, and there's no a sense of, wow, I can't be quiet because I don't know what I'm going to hear. You just love solitude, and you love contemplation because the God of the universe is just talking to you, and he's walking with you in the cool of the day, and there's no shame. The shadow hasn't come. The serpent hasn't come. The forbidden fruit hasn't been eaten. So when I'm talking about Eden, I'm talking about something that is so deeply embedded in your spiritual DNA, you will never shake it. All the days of your life, it will echo inside your heart. Eternity is inside your heart in the book of Ecclesiastes. So this song, this fabric is woven throughout your spiritual DNA. It's involved in your existence, and it's calling you back home, which is the third message within this message. It's this idea of God bringing you back to himself, bringing back you to yourself. And so I'm on the mountain in 2013, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is the story here? Because I had this sense of what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. He was an individual, a Soviet dissident, brilliant man, wrote a ton of stuff. I really like reading guys who, well, unfortunately, most of them are dead, but I really like reading guys like Paul. You know, he spent a lot of time in prison, so a lot of what he wrote was through a pen of pain, and so he actually bled words. It's like, Hemingway said, he said, writing is really nothing. It's just bleeding on white paper. And he was a very troubled individual, and he wrote brilliant stuff, but it was mostly through pain. If you look at great art, Cowboy, who's in the film, he's a 72-year-old black ops guy from Vietnam, bought this painting from a friend of his. It was kind of a Remington Western type of thing. And the guy was going through tremendous pain as he painted it. I think he had lost a marriage and a child at the same time. It was just horrific. I mean, just death, despair, but something really beautiful came out, this landscape that was just surreal. And life got better for his friend, and after a while he circled back several years later and says, I want to buy that painting back from you that I sold to you because I need the money. And Cowboy, right or wrong, said, he's like a Ross Perot kind of guy, I ain't going to give that back to you. We're both near, you're never going to paint like that again. So it was just kind of like what he was saying was, we both know that out of a tremendous pain came unbelievable beauty. You will never paint that picture again. So be real careful with how you treat your pain. Don't look at it as an adversary. There's a lot of beauty that's embedded inside that pain that will bring blessing and beauty to other people, including yourself. But we want to create space there because it hurts. And we don't like the feeling. It makes us feel like failure, especially with men. We don't like pain because it feels like failure. But if I've learned anything over time, it's this: you can't heal unless you feel. If you can't feel, you don't heal. So the whole operative word that we used over the weekend was, it's not so much that you're a prisoner being punished, it's less punitive and it's more redemptive. God is actually treating you as a patient, and the hurt that you're feeling is the good and faithful hand of a surgeon using an evil blade, if you will, your circumstances, to cut open this wound, because his mercy is so severe and his grace is so awful and his truth is so terrible. He'll do whatever it takes to get you well. And he wants to suck this poison and this shame out of you, and to do so, it may feel like you're dying, and that's the whole point. He wants to carve out this old life that you've been clinging on to and bring something new. And so I have this whole different paradigm now to work with, and I want to end it in a message of forgiveness here in a moment. But it's this idea that the pain that you have, be very careful how you handle this, because in some mysterious, paradoxical way, it actually encrypts your purpose. I don't know how that works, but when you find your pain, you often find simultaneously your purpose. You mentioned misery births the message, and chaos births calling, and all these other things come out of absolute turmoil. And so I think that's one of the emblems there. So I had to stumble into this grace element. So how did this happen? I'll just give you the story that initiated it, and then I want to talk a little bit about forgiveness, because I think for whatever reason that's heavy on my heart this morning. So February 22nd, 1998, this is actually the years before I'm climbing up on Ararat. I'm on Ararat, and I'm thinking about, what's going on here. I need to wrap up a loose end here. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, sorry, he's in the Siberian Gulag for 10 years, comes out. It's a human meat grinding machine. He's watched the worst that man can do to man. And he comes out of this experience and he says something along these lines, that a man's life or a human's life is a series of encryptions. And if he can't break that algorithm or that code, that secret code, that enigmatic code, he despairs because he feels like his life is meaningless. Henry David Thoreau, he's from these neck of the woods or thereabouts. He talked about living a life of quiet desperation, which is so incredibly evocative. It feels like, yeah, wow, that guy really nailed it in a single sentence. Lives of quiet desperation. It's desperate, but it's quiet. It's subdued, and it's despairing. And I felt like that on the mountain. I was like, wow, I've got a whole bunch of dots. I'd been collecting dots, for 4.5 decades. But nothing was connecting. I was like, what's going on here? I felt like there was this other theme developing, and I didn't have the interpretive skill to understand. It almost felt like Braille to me, and I needed to just somehow brush my hand up against this thing and be able to see beyond sight, see beyond the broad rim of the world, and be able to comprehend what is the real narrative that's going on here. And I'll wrap it up in the end of what I found. But back to February 22nd, 1998, our future runs through our past, so I had to go backwards before I went forward. I was preaching in a church on a Sunday morning. It was middle of the winter, and so the orange thing that appears in the sky, we don't see very much of that in Michigan. So we all turn Mayan, and we worship it as a god, and it shows up every 4 weeks. Almost like we need to build a pyramid or something and do a human sacrifice. Like, wow, what is that? We forgot about that. So it showed up, and the night before, in the morning of, after just a beautiful snowstorm, so everything was just, surreal. You drive to church, and everybody comes in cherub-cheeked, and they're all rosy and smiley. The lights are subdued. The worship is going on. And I'm preaching that morning on Genesis chapter 6 of all texts. And I've heard some news in the week or two preceding, from 3 individuals that deeply unsettled me, to the point where looking back now, I kind of was in shock. Denial, which is usually what happens when you hear really bad news. You just go into a state of shock. You don't really believe it, and you go through a progression of grief thereafter. But I had heard 3 guys tell me something that was very unsettling to me. So I walked into this service. I had this deep sense of foreboding, almost like the storm clouds were gathering, and I was just waiting for the sky to be filled up with black crows or something Hitchcockian that way, just what's going to go on here. You just had this sense of, man, it's just uneasy. I just had this uneasy feeling. I'm preaching this message, Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. I'm unpacking that verse, talking about how God's heart was filled with pain. And when you do the original rendering of that verse and the language that's involved, it gives this idea that God was in so much pain that he couldn't speak. So it's like getting really, really bad news, whether it's the death of a child, the loss of a job, a really bad medical report. It takes your breath away, and you just drop the phone, and you've literally collapsed. And I think that's how God felt. I think he just wept and flooded the earth poetically, and his heart ripped open, and the world was flooded from the deep that exists underneath the subterranean world that a lot of our thoughts and beliefs come from. And I'm just preaching away, and this guy comes walking in about halfway through the message, young guy, and there's a chair saved in the back row. Next to that chair is a attractive young lady, and he sits next to her after taking his time to make his way through the row, and he puts his arm around her chair, and she kind of comes up close to him, and they're both smiling back at me. It feels surreal because it's like a dream. There's nobody behind me, just like Sunday morning here, and you think, oh, wow, they're dating or they're engaged or they're married. Well, the last half of that is true. She's married, that's my wife, and that's my intern. And this is happening while I'm preaching in a church, right? So when you study ancient literature, it doesn't feel this way now because we're in a modern world and we feel like we're detached from battle. But when you're in these medieval landscapes or the biblical narrative, what did the people do? They always ran to the temple, the tabernacle, the altar, the Holy of Holies, whatever, the high tower. They always withdrew themselves into the deepest keep and just made a firewall that the dragon couldn't penetrate, or the hammer of the underworld, or whatever it was, whether it was true and historic. We just went to Masada. I was there a week and a half ago, and it was just this incredible fortress that the last Jewish revolt was finally quenched. 900 and some odd Jews were still defying the Roman Empire, and they built this siege ramp. It took them like 6 to 8 months, and it's still there to this day. And they put the gate on fire and burst through and found 900 and some odd Jews that had already committed suicide the night before. And they found stones where they cast lots to figure out the final 10, what their order of death would be. So I can't even get my mind wrapped around that, looking at your family and just saying death before dishonor, death before slavery. But it had that kind of feel to it. It was like, man, this is a sacred place. This is church. I mean, this stuff shouldn't be happening in church. It should be happening outside of church. So it felt like a dragon just burned down the gate, and all this evil poured in. And I was caught up in this drama, but it had a dreamlike effect because I was the only one that knew what was going on. You see how weird that is? So I'm like, I don't even know how I got through the message. I got through it. I came off the stage, exit stage right, you're right, my left. And it's just weird. I can almost picture it. I just walked down. I put my hand on the stairwell. I was just shaking. I felt vertigo. I felt like I was just nauseated. It felt like I just swallowed a hand grenade. I looked and smiled nice on the outside, but inside I was just all busted up. And I told the pastor that I worked for, I just said, you know what? That was the last day I'll be in the pulpit. It was a good ride. Did it for 10 years and got to speak all over the country because I was a consultant at that point for our national denomination. But I said, today is probably the last day. And, I just think I saw everything blow up in front of me. I lost my marriage, my mission, my ministry, arguably but part of my masculine. I mean, everything was just destroyed. And went into a 15-year exile, made a ton of money, and they ended up getting married, and to this day I think they still are. I don't wish them any harm or any evil, although that wasn't the case on the front end of it. I wanted to help this gentleman exit the planet, so I made sure that guys like Tom with certain skill sets, just kept far away at the picture because I just was like, I don't want to be in the same room with this guy because there's something that comes out of me. I grew up in a slaughterhouse. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that. So I just didn't want to do this thing that was, filtering around in my head. I say that, now, and there's some humor with that, but it wasn't good. So I was in a bad place. He exited, kind of went underground. I don't even know where he went for a year or two. And it took me a while to surface and begin to realize, what was it that caused that to happen? What ownership do I need to take from that? Because it was tremendously shameful. Here I am, this youth pastor guy. I'm leading marriage retreats. I'm doing marriage seminars, and my own marriage blows up in the worst possible way. And the fallout was just spectacular. Fortunately, the church, still rallied around me, and it was just weird. It was just a shameful episode. And like war, you get, it's carnage, so you get other stuff on you from other people. And it felt like that. It was like a bomb exploded and stuff just went flying everywhere, and it got all over me, and I just felt like it was just like a violation of innocence, like I guess you could use the word rape. It just felt, that's a powerful word, but it felt that way. And so I walked away from that just saying, okay, I'm going to put some distance between that pain. I had people begging me, you need to get into therapy. And I was like, no, I did the whole, back to the King Arthur thing, I did the Black Knight at the bridge, the king wants to pass and the Black Knight won't let him, and so he's obviously the better of the two swordsmen, so he keeps hacking off every limb, and finally he's just a stump of a man, in typical British humor, the blood's coming out with like hose things everywhere, and he's just like, biting the guy as he's passing by. Come back and fight me, you little coward. He's just biting at him because that's all he has left is his mouth. I felt like that. I was like, everything was just gone, but I was still the stump of a man, and I was just kind of like, it's a flesh wound. I'm feeling better. The whole, you guys like Monty Python? I don't know where that came from. This is where ADD picks in the gear. It's like, if you just give me enough time, all these people come out of my head. That's why I'm good at, like in the mountain, because if you just give me enough space, all these people come out of my head, and Gandalf, you cannot pass, and all this stuff. So the whole weekend was a Middle-earth. It was just like a wandering into the vagaries of Middle-earth. So I just felt like, this is just getting really strange. I don't know where I'm going with this story now. What was I talking about? Humor has a way of creating levity, but it also is very distractive. So help me out here. Thank you. Yes. We were talking about God, weren't we? It's church. That's right. It's church. Okay. So, a terrible situation. I was like, what do I do with this stuff? So I walked out of that, and people were begging me, you got to get into counseling. And I went through 15 years of exile. I married a gal that I actually dated as a teenager, and she and I actually, I don't know if you can call it dating. We hung out together, and our two younger siblings hung out with us, and they ended up falling in love, and they got married. So I know it's legal in Michigan. It all worked out. So anyway, they got married, and then I circled back to her after all this time, and then we ended up getting married. Our kids look a little bit alike. It's okay. It's different. Anyway, so I walked through that 9 years later, perfect storm of economics, emotional, financial, living in the epicenter of the recession in 2007 in Detroit metro area, which was like, ground zero for all that, the worst that happened in America at that point, the collapse of the auto industry and the home market. And so complete devastation, bankruptcy skyrocketed, divorces went parallel with it, and the courts were flooded with, divorce filings and bankruptcy filings, and we got caught up in that storm. It was more complicated than that, but that was part of it. So I went through a bankruptcy, was $1 million net worth guy, lost everything, lost the house, lost the marriage, arguably my sanity, and now I'm in a really bad spot because I'm 0 for 2, right, when it comes to marriage, which is shameful in of itself, and I've lost all my money, and I'm a Dutch guy. I like money. I think about it a lot. At least I did then. When you don't have it anymore, you don't think about it as much. It's kind of a funny thing. And I just lost it all. And the Lord just kind of spoke to me and says, look, you're going to go through a Job-like experience here. I'm going to sift your life like wheat, and you're going to lose a lot. You're going to lose your marriage. You're going to lose all your money. You're going to lose your house. But there's two things I won't allow to be touched. One is your health, and I've been in perfect health throughout the whole process, which is wealth, because you can't really buy that. And I have an unbelievably strong, real, and vibrant relationship with both of my children, which defies all odds. And I have a amicable, good relationship with their mother. Our children are not being poisoned, and I feel like God has given me some very strong assurances that it's going to be okay with them, which is huge. I can't even tell you. You talk about grace, that's an enormous weight that's been lifted off my shoulders, that somehow God would protect innocence because they didn't ask for any of this. So walk through that second divorce, and I can't get back to my past, and I didn't tell this story last night, but I'll tell it now, and then I want to jump into forgiveness in the closing moments here. I can't get back to my past, right? I'm climbing this mountain, I'm looking around, and the special ops guys that are with us are all diagnosing me with the same thing they have, and I think it's like arc fever, and they're like, no, you ding-dong, it's post-traumatic stress. syndrome or disorder, whichever. I know it's a floating word and we like to attach it to everything, but and I said, well, what makes you say something like that? And they says, well, two things. When we look at you, you got that 2,000-yard vacant stare. You're just not even home. Something has fried you, dude. I mean, you're just a space cadet. You're never here. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I mean, they would know because they pull up their pant leg and they got a bunch of stuff missing because they've been shot at, or they lift their shirt up and it's like, holy cow, these guys have been Frankenstein together. I can't even get them up the mountain because they're all shot up. And so they've seen a lot of stuff. And then they said when you talk, you never talk about, you talk always either about the future or you're beating yourself up about the past, but you're never now. You're never here. Lights are on, nobody's home. You're emotionally vacant. And then all these words came back of when I went to a therapist and I actually walked out because he ticked me off. He's like, dude, you don't know what your home address is. And I was like, what are you talking about? I gave him my license. And I was like, I don't know what you got on the wall here. You're a little professional thing, but you're about the weirdest guy I've ever met. What are you talking about? I know my home address. He's like, okay, wow, you're totally missing the point. And I just said, yeah, I actually am because, here's my license. He basically just said, let me just be really blunt. You are the most emotionally vacant client I've ever had in my entire professional career. And he just says, you are not here. You don't even know what a home address even looks like. I don't know what happened to you, but dude, you're just so far from being in the present. Your mind is going 1,000,000 miles an hour. You're running from something, obviously, and you're just going to go, you're hell-bent. And if you kill yourself, you're going to be like all the other people that you climb with who were not afraid of dying. They were afraid of living. That's why they keep pushing the envelope, because they could care less where the eggs of the planet. They're just in so much pain, they don't want to live anymore. They're scared to death of waking up every day to life. That's not a bad deal. It's over, it's done, you die doing what you love to do. And he just says, I'm telling you, you don't know what your home address is. So now, 15 years later, these guys are saying this, they're using some of the same language, and I'm all ears because they're saying, you can see it in my eyes, I can hear it in my voice, so I'm really clued in. And just prior to that, in July 7th of 2013, I got on the mountain in mid-July. I led a group of a couple of guys that didn't make it into the film. We did some precursory work, and then the rest of the group came in August. Really, you only have 2 months on Ararat where you can do anything before the storms happen and you can't get anywhere on the mountain itself. But I had this experience. It's, in a professional sense, it's called a Proustian involuntary memory relapse. In layman's vernacular, it's a flashback, and it can be a sight, smell, sound, name, location, whatever. It's just something that brings you back to a memory that you have now buried like a zombie in a grave. You think you've killed it, but the problem with burying memories is they're like zombies, and they pop up at the worst possible time, and they haunt you because you can't kill that thing. And if you try to kill that thing, you can't just isolate and compartmentalize that. You kill everything. So this is a word for somebody here this morning. You've tried to take this part of your life and just bury it and forget about it. And I'm telling you, you will pay an incredibly high price because you can't bury a part of your heart without killing all of it. It's impossible. It's interwoven together. And the Bible talks about how, and the Greeks even had that, they looked at the heart as the captain. It's the captain of the ship, and it's almost this Walt Whitman effect. If the captain of the ship falls, if there's blood on the floor and on the deck, the ship goes awry, the will goes nuts, the mind goes crazy, the body goes crazy, because the captain of the ship, my captain, is dead, and there's something that's so precious, it's slain, and now the ship is rudderless. Its sails are rent, and you're just blown on the high seas because the captain, the center of your soul, the center of your being is dead. And nothing else works because everything comes back to the heart. I mean, this is biblical. The Bible says the heart is the wellspring. It's the headwaters from which all of your life emanates from. And if the heart is pure, all things are pure. If the heart is hurt, you just hurt people, including yourself, and you have no power to forgive, and you have no power to transcend anything because your heart is not well. That's why Jesus spent so much time going after the heart. That's why we spent this whole weekend going after the heart. And so I had God, again, in his severe mercy, I lose everything. I've got 12 boxes left. I'm ready to move into my vehicle, which I did for many, many years. Some of that story is continuing because I didn't want to go into an empty apartment because it just shouted out to me, you lost everything. And I couldn't absorb the reality that, yeah, I lost everything except for the kids. But going back home, there's no children are laughing and running around your legs. There's no dogs. There's no laughter. There's no music. There's no mirth. There's no wife greeting you. There's no smell of food. It's just this big, empty, vacant place, much like my heart. empty, vacant, absent, dark. So what does God do? He puts me in a situation where he's got me in checkmate. I'm moving boxes from the condo where we lived to my parents' house, which is another level of healing and humiliation all at the same time. I never pictured I'd be back to 21 where I owed nobody nothing, but I didn't own anything either. So I'm back to being 21 again in my mid-40s. And there's 12 boxes, and there's one box I feel like God says, you need to look inside that box. Inside that box, there's another box, and I want you to listen to something inside that box. I open it up like a Russian doll, and there's a whole bunch of cassette tapes, which for those of you that are millennials, we found these things on the ark. And it was beautiful. And Noah, you know, he played it, and that's how the animals, that's the mystery. How did all the animals get together and love each other? Well, they probably played, what's that one big thing that came out? Einstein, Baby Einstein. You know, just played all this music, and the animals just were loving each other. And, you know, the T-Rex just felt warm and fuzzy towards the little sheepy. You know, it was just this happy, happy time. And so my son is like, he doesn't even know what is that? That is like a relic? I mean, you know, how do you, he wants to like, you know, touch something, and it's like, no, you got to put in this magic thing called a cassette tape player. Well, I still have my 99 4Runner, just went on and on. I plugged it in, an equally ancient piece of technology, and I'm listening to this dude who was me on February 22nd, 1998, preaching this message. I'm driving down the road, listening to this guy, and I feel like Morgan Freeman in Shawshank. I wish I could go back to that young man and tell him, don't do it. Rejuvenation, I don't even know what that word means, so just go ahead and stamp your papers, sonny. Frankly, this church, I can't finish that dialogue, but it's just like, I want to touch this guy. I want to talk to this guy. I want to tell him it's going to be okay. I want to tell him I want to tell him to seek a counselor. I want to tell him to get into a band of brothers. I want to tell him that somehow it's going to work out, and from this pain, God's going to give you a way to connect with people that you never had before. I want to tell him all that, but I can't, and he's stuck, and I'm listening to this tape, and then about halfway through the message, it's like somebody grabs his throat, and he's like gagging in trauma. I mean, he's just drowning, and you can just see the guy coming into the back row of the church, and you can hear the cadence falter, and you can hear the voice become thick with emotion, and you can just sense this guy is dying. It's like I'm almost looking at my own execution. It's like he's just breathing his last breath, and you want to go out and rescue him, and then all of a sudden something happens. It's like driving through a snowstorm in New England, you know, with your brights on. It's the whole Millennium Falcon Enterprise deck, you know, warp speed. It's just everything gets kind of weird and fuzzy, and then it comes into crystal clarity, and you're sweating, and it's just bizarre, but it's healing all the same. And I can't even go into what I saw there, but I saw a glimpse, I think, in that moment of how God saw that day. And what I saw came into a whole different thing. I wrote for 500 days, 2,000 pages. I bled it out. But what I saw in summary was, I think something really precious happened that day that needed to happen so that today could happen. Here's what I want to say to you, and then I want to close. My life has been a series of seemingly mistakes made by other people towards me or me towards them. It's very difficult to be married to someone like me that was emotionally vacant. I was a great guy. They would both say the same thing if you interviewed them. I encourage you not, but if you did, they would say, good guy, man, just loves God, just a good guy, but loves the kids. You know, the second one would say, great dad, but they both would say the same thing. I've never been so lonely as when I was married to that guy. It was like a stranger. It was like a roommate. I didn't even know who this guy was. Nobody got into his inner world. I mean, this guy had booby traps on booby traps. You know, it's like my buddy Cowboy. He built like a mortar blast-proof home in Texas. And I'm like, do you think sometimes you might be struggling with this whole war thing? What are you talking about? He's like, I don't know, this mortar blast building and your parameter and stuff. You ever think, well, doesn't everybody do that? He says, no, most people don't build a home that can withstand a mortar blast. And they just don't, you know, they don't have multiple exit points. That tunnel you dug, have you ever thought about maybe that's a little abnormal? You know, he's just, whoo, you know. And he's a good guy to have in the mountain. He'd always build a gun every year and disassemble it and get it through customs and then reassemble it in Turkey. He's just a really clever guy. It was like a little game that he played every year. He was like a cat. He just couldn't, I mean, you could throw him, and I saw it happen over and over again. You just threw the guy, and he'd always land on his feet. Unbelievable. Cat-like. Anyway, so I go through this tape experience, and I'm beginning to re-envision, and God's giving me a retelling of the story, which is how you heal. It's Christ comes back, and he takes you back to that place, and he's with you in that place. I want to tell you something here real quick, because this is powerful. I had a guy speak at a thing that we do for men in Grand Rapids. He won the Alone show on the History Channel. He's from Grand Rapids area, and so he beat everybody out, lasted 66 days in the wilderness alone, and won $500,000. Wow, great story, Disney ending, right? What you don't know about this story is he was a missionary and went through a divorce. That's a whole other issue, and one of his daughters was raped. And the guy who raped his daughter is sitting across the street from him, just taunting him. Like, what are you going to do? And everything in him wants to just help this guy exit the planet. I can relate to that. I have a daughter. God, help the man who touches my daughter. I might go Old Testament. I might just throw away the New Testament. Just go Old Testament, man. God, just give me the word. Give me the green light. And so I'm like, as a dad, I'm like, yeah, that's what I would feel. It's just raw rage just come out. Like, you're just not going to live. And he brought it to his daughter, and he says, look, I don't know how to process this. I want to hurt this man that hurt you. And what she said to him was so powerful. I can't even begin to comprehend that. She says, Dad, you don't understand. When this man was doing this thing to me, which was evil and demonic and was from the pit of hell, it was vile, she said this, I've never felt the presence of Jesus so strong as when that happened, while it happened. Now he's like, drop the weapon. What can you say to that? What can you say to your daughter that's telling you that when this dark day happened, he was right there? I mean, I get choked up about it. If you're a dad, it's like, gee, what do you say to something like that? And he was just, it was like, wow, the power of forgiveness just flooded his life, because he's like, if she can forgive this man, maybe I can. Now, that's an extreme example, and those happen to give you a paradigm to work with, because that's the way the Bible works. It gives you extreme examples. Another extreme example, and I'll close with this, is Joseph. He was on a incredible trajectory. His dad's the patriarch. He's like the big family. Every community's got the family, and they're just like, well thought of, and and he's in that family, and he's the favored son in that family, and his career looks great, and he's got a dream, and he shares it. And I know I'm an older brother. If my younger brother said, someday you're going to bow down and worship me, I probably would say, let me help you exit the planet. I don't agree with that. That doesn't appeal to anything of an older brother instinct inside of me. Now, the opposite, that might be true, and so he shares it. And then he gets, the story, he gets put into the prison system, and he's left, and he's like falsely accused of rape. Talk about a stigma attached to you. I mean, wow, and he's never really exonerated. The Bible narrative is not descriptive in that sense. It never says, and Joseph was found innocent, but somehow God's destiny played itself out before him. It accelerates itself to Genesis chapter 45, and he's in front of his brothers, and they're now bowing down to him. It's a longer story. I'm accelerating it, but it's now come to the place where Joseph is in front of his brothers, and he can exact revenge, and he can get his justice, and he can humiliate these guys, and he finally reveals himself, and he shows them who he is, and he says these words, you didn't send me to Egypt. And they're like, what is this guy? First of all, they're in shock. It's like, who is this guy? And then he's telling stuff that only he would know as their brother, and he says, you didn't send me to Egypt. In Genesis 45, I think it's verse 10 or 8 or somewhere in there, he says this, pause, dramatic effect, punctuation point. God did. I'm going to say this and close with this. I can feel some hurt in the room this morning. I can feel it in my own heart. I can feel it in the stuff that I saw online this morning. I can feel it in the story that I told you about my friend Dave and his daughter being raped. Can I just plead with you? Maybe I should get on my knees here and just kind of plead with you. And maybe just close your eyes for a moment and just kind of forget about everybody that's around you. And I would just plead with you. Can I be the voice of an echo of eternity to you this morning? And can I plead with you as an ambassador, as some guy that floats in and out of a lot of different places and a lot of different times? Can I plead with you to forgive the people that have hurt you? Because if they hadn't hurt you, you never would have learned how to forgive. And the power of forgiveness is a secret, because in that power to forgive, in that ability to say, You're not denying that somebody hurt you. You're not denying that the bad thing that they did ultimately brought you to where your destiny should place you, but you're seeing a higher vision, and you're beginning to realize that in the power and in the opportunity to forgive, you are being given a gift. Hear these words. What is the gift? The gift is you're finally able to know how to let go. To let go. To cut the umbilical cord to your victimization, to cut the umbilical cord that keeps you to the spaceship of your past and to the known terra firma of your own soul's territory. And it cuts that umbilical cord, and you can become this astronaut of awe floating through the cosmos, unattached to your past, the pain and the hurt. And what do you float into? You float into the arms of God. You float into something that is so vast and so all-encompassing that it's inescapable. You float into the being of God, and you become like Christ, who hung on that cross, who was nailed and who was humiliated, and who said these words, God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They're hurt. They're scared. They're afraid. Forgive them. The people that have hurt you, some of them may have had evil intent, others maybe not. But at the end of the day, they hurt you because they are also hurting. And God has given you, this is a word for somebody here this morning. I feel this really heavy. It's dense. It's weighty. You've got to forgive because you're killing yourself. You're killing your soul. You're killing your heart. You're killing your marriage. You're killing everything that you love because you are holding on to a dead corpse. You're dragging it around, and the smell of death is around you, and people can sense that, and it's time to cut that umbilical cord. It's time to look at the people that have hurt you and greet them like Jesus greeted Judas in the garden. He didn't say, "Come here, you fool." He said, "Come and do what you must, friend." Your enemies are your friends. Your pain is your purpose. These people are portals into your purpose for your life. If it wasn't for Judas betraying Christ, the cross would have never happened. If it wasn't for Joseph's brothers betraying him, the world would not have been saved. It put Joseph in the right place at the right time with the right people. It put Jesus Christ in the right place at the right time for all people. So, Lord, we invite you into this pain. It's such a sacred place, this thing called pain. And I pray that you would give the ability, this is a gift because we don't have this innate. I pray that you give the gift of forgiveness to us. I pray that you give us the grace to forgive those that have hurt us and to release those individuals to your care, to your justice, to your mercy, and to your grace. And I pray that people that are in bondage to unforgiveness this morning, that they learn how to let it go. Let it go. Maybe put your hands in a cup and hold that unforgiveness and that bitterness and separate that and just imagine it like water passing through your hands or like the grains of time filtering through your hands like an hourglass. Just let it go. And then, God, I pray that as they forgive, you give them the power of transformation. You bring out something new. And all the real estate that the hate took up, it's just love. Because that's all that's left. Just do it, Jesus. And I pray for the man and the woman in here who can't forgive themselves. And they can't forgive their past. And they just come in here full of self-hatred. I can feel it. Just let it go. And let them realize that they will never be clever enough. They will never be wise enough to be their own judge. That seat, that place of honor, that place of power
is only for one person, and it's the person who sees the whole picture. It's the person who is perfect. I pray that they would know that the only person that can be on that throne is Jesus Christ. And he says, I forgive you so that you can forgive yourself, so that you can forgive others. So Jesus, forgive us for making an idol out of ourselves. Forgive us for making an idol out of our past, and let us just let that go. And thank you, Jesus, that you're a good judge. You're a kind judge. You're a good surgeon, and you do these works. So just bring about this spirit of forgiveness of the past, of ourselves, of other people, and bring us into this other dimension where we actually can circle back and say, thank you for the hurt. Thank you for the pain. Because if it wasn't for that, I would never know how to forgive. Jesus, just seal this work. This is a real sacred moment. And just set these people free. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.